All right. Hey everybody. Thank you for joining us and tuning in to what will be the first of a video series with our partners over at the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right, where we'll be examining extremism, disinformation, how it proliferates, and how we can combat it. So first up, we have the awesome Associate Director of the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right and researcher at the University of Leeds, Dr. William Allchorn. And how are you doing today?
Oh, thanks, Simon. Yeah, no, I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me to join you today. And yeah, I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So appreciate you taking the time. I mean, as many of our readers may know, Rantt has been partnered with your organization for about 3 years now, and we've published over 150 articles from your network of scholars, PhDs, experts in this area. And these articles have analyzed extremism and they really dove into how to combat it and address it. So let's start by just giving our viewers some background on yourself and CARR.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, so I've been studying radical right extremism for about 8 years now. So I did my PhD at the University of Leeds, looking mainly at anti-Islam street protest movements. Before that, I was looking at fascist parties, and more recently, I've been looking at some of the smaller kind of violent groups transnationally. But the centre itself kind of emerged from, I guess, that post Charlottesville moment where a lot of people in August of 2017, when there was that Unite the Right rally in Virginia, kind of woke up to how some of the forces that were coalescing on the right in America were kind of coming together, and in that instance, in a fairly tragic and violent way, with the death of one of the anti-fascist activists who attended. And I mean, that's still case is still going on related to that. But that kind of, at least for me and Matthew, kind of impressed the urgency of starting a centre to get academic colleagues together under one roof. Usually we have like panels at conferences, but there aren't kind of a hub for researchers looking at this issue, so that we could kind of promote better public understanding around some of the issues that this particular form of extremism presents, and using that as a way of kind of allowing citizens as well to kind of grapple and hopefully prevent some of the more problematic aspects of this form of extremism. And as part of that work, Rantt's been a really crucial partner, giving us perhaps a more extensive platform than we would have had by ourselves, and also some fantastic collaborations there. So we've been really Rantt's been one of our kind of key partners in this kind of wider public dissemination, and it's just been a great ride over the past 3 years.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know how much I'm honored to be your partner and being able to push this issue, because as we've seen over the last few years, especially, well, I mean, obviously it's been deep-seated for decades and centuries within the US, but it's funny you brought up Charlottesville, because that really was one of the moments when people seemed to see the veil come back, and they realized just how extensive and deep-seated this is. And then it kind of culminated in the insurrection with the Confederate flag waving in the Capitol. And you, having been a scholar in this field, and really, you weren't surprised by this likely, but when did you? I know you and Matthew started this in the wake of what we saw in recent years, but when would you say you initially became concerned with the rise of radical right extremism within the US? When did you start seeing those headwinds?
I think the kind of the events that kind of tipped international attention around what was happening in the US was certainly the creation of a lot of very extreme neo-Nazi groups around that period about 3 or 4 years ago. So thinking about groups like Atomwaffen Division, then kind of the base, and more recently the Russian imperialist movement. So what was quite kind of concerning perhaps about this this period, which included the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, was simply that we had quite a transnational group of organizations that took inspiration actually from James Mason and his ideas around kind of neo-Nazi accelerationism, trying to bring about a conflagration around a race war. And I mean, I guess when we think about Charlottesville as well, we had the culmination of those more kind of extreme kind of neo-Nazi element with members of the alt-right sections of movements that have become unfortunately kind of family names. And some of those including kind of anti-government militias also came together on January the 6th. So it's kind of, it's been brewing for a while. If we think about the immediate kind of impulse that kind of triggered some of the kind of rioting, and some people have been kind of debating around should it be characterized as a form of terrorism. In the wake of the Capitol siege, has kind of, I guess, was in relation to some of the what one Yale historian called some of the big lies around the election that Donald Trump was espousing. And that's interesting when we think about kind of the mood music behind these movements and what emboldens them, and what kind of spurs them on. A historian who's one of the fellows at CARR, Aristotle Callis, he talks about giving a license to hate. So a figure might not necessarily tell someone to go down and burn down like a synagogue or something, but it's that kind of trigger and kind of pouring in over a period of time of kind of anti-elite, kind of anti-minority sentiments that can lead people into a place where they feel threatened and might be wanting to kind of act on on that impulse.
I mean, it's a good point when you bring up the fact that obviously the license to hate that Donald Trump seemed to give to these people, because really what it was he allowed them to be proud of their depravity and be proud of their white supremacist views. They were always there, but before polite society was like, oh no, you'll get you probably shouldn't be that way. And then we see one of the people espousing those views rise to the top. And we'll dive. I have a few questions about, of course, the domestic terrorism aspect, from law enforcement perspective. But before we get to that, I definitely think your point is interesting on the kind of culmination and collaboration between disparate groups that didn't really unite before, even like kind of started at Charlottesville, and then we kind of saw it how it was a kind of more cohesive unit in the insurrection itself on January 6th. And it's just when we have these groups like, now we have the Oath Keepers, Proud Boys. We even saw, like you said, the anti-government groups that weren't necessarily seated in white supremacy itself, those militia groups that were involved as well. And when you look at this kind of layout of groups now, and how they're being, we'll get to law enforcement in a second, but when you look at these groups, which group are you most concerned about? Because like you said, a lot of these are household names now. Everyone knows kind of who they are and what they're about, especially when we have 60 Minutes kind of giving them, and other organizations giving them a lot of play and coverage. what do you think? Which group are you most concerned about, uh, and what should we be watching?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question, Ahmed. I think the way that I would answer it is that I'm probably most concerned about groups which are more on the fringes.
Mhm.
So, I mean, certainly, I guess one of the things that we saw coming, the kind of groups that don't have such a kind of strict kind of structure or hierarchy. Um, so what we saw kind of coming out of the January 6th event was kind of what would the questions around sort of what would happen to people who are part of QAnon, for example. There was lots of stories and reporting after that about how more extreme groups, more kind of neo-Nazi groups, were going to perhaps try and attempt to recruit or black pill kind of adherents to these movements, and you're obviously hearing stories of people who've lost family members down the rabbit hole of these kind of conspiracy theory beliefs and movements. So I think it's always what we see with extremist movements is often when they're kind of splintering and disbanding, that that kind of breakdown leads to more chaotic kind of escalations in forms of violence, just simply because there isn't as much kind of regulation or leadership around that. So some of these more, so QAnon is concerned, and kind of seeing how that's kind of spread, internationally as well around this kind of pandemic period. Um, and kind of spread its tentacles into other causes as kind of like part of this distrust around elites. So I'd perhaps kind of focus on how we can, in terms of responding, how we can kind of come up with ways of kind of countering these conspiracy theories and misinformation.
Yeah,
In the rounds, both to people who are kind of further down the rabbit hole, as it were, but also kind of how we can engage with people, ordinary people on social media, so that they don't kind of start that journey in the first place, as it were.
exactly. And I think it's definitely a good point to talk about QAnon, because you're right. It really is one of those instances and one of those phenomenons where it kind of bleeds into all other extremist groups, like, because there's really something for everyone in there, and not in a good way, but it's couched in anti-Semitism. People don't really talk that much about that aspect of it, so therefore some of the bigger, it kind of can, it's kind of a gateway drug to
Mm.
pretty much any extremist group that you would like to that you would want someone to become a member of. So, and that's honestly one of the reasons why we're doing this series, of course, because it's so important. Obviously, in the future interviews, we have one focus on specifically online, and other aspects of this issue, and exactly how to de-radicalize. We have one with Natalie at the end of this, how to de-radicalize people. But I think we could still touch on that here, because one of your focuses, and I know you're writing a book on this as well, is counter narratives. So, and how to essentially combat this, whether it's online or just media, whether it's individual who needs to help de-radicalize their family member. So when it comes to counter narratives, can you just tell us a little about that broadly, and how you see counter narratives and how they can be used to combat this disinformation and this widespread extremism that we just see kind of eating up even well-meaning, just ordinary Americans?
Thanks. Yeah, no, thanks, Simon. Yeah, I mean, counter narratives. It's a technique used mainly in kind of counter-terrorism, but it's increasingly being used also in terms of counter-extremism um, policy making, both at kind of a government level, but also at an NGO level. And it's basically trying to equip people with kind of ways and means of responding to extremist messaging. So, for example, if there was kind of like a white supremacist group that was trying to organize and recruit around, let's say, a high school in, let's say, like a rural part of Virginia or something, or yeah, or a location where these groups are more active. It's around kind of giving people the tools in order to kind of combat that sort of, yeah, that messaging. So yeah, as part of a tie-up with Hedaya, who are kind of a centre for excellence when it comes to countering violent extremism, we've been developing some guides and reports kind of surveying the land in terms of how these programs have been used in the past. There's a lot of interesting debates that go on around the extent to which we should be focusing on the narratives and ideas as opposed to some of the more social elements involved in people becoming part of far-right groups. Not to bore listeners too much, but there's kind of this division or kind of debate going on about whether kind of people come to these movements for as part of kind of building a kind of family of kind of comrades or brothers or like camaraderie, and whether ideology comes later. That's certainly kind of my sense of having studied kind of far right street movements, or it's kind of like the ideology first. People have grievances and they use the ideology to kind of explain what's happening. So yeah, I mean, in terms of looking at like the US picture, there's been quite a few different programs that have tried to do this, mainly looking at kind of the Islamist extremist side of things. And there has been some work done, particularly by Life After Hate and their former outfit, which was Exit USA. But what we kind of expressed in one of the reports, which we wrote on, one was kind of focused on the US, was kind of the lack of some of these programs kind of going on. And I know that Peril, who are based at American University, have been doing a lot of good work recently trying to test a technique that they call, which is kind of, it's to try and not get too technical, it's kind of a way of, as I said at the start, kind of equipping people with the tools. So basically they expose people to these messages, but from extremist groups, but before that they kind of ask them, or they kind of tell them what to look out for. And apparently that's quite a robust and effective way of people being able to kind of critically engage with approaches from, in this case, because it's an experimental setup, it's kind of like a fake approach from a set of extremist actors. But yeah, so it's kind of, I mean, the technique of countering narratives is fairly new kind of policy tool. It's only been around for about a decade and a half, but it's a fairly kind of powerful way of helping citizens engage with these and identify these kind of narratives that unfortunately have become quite mainstream in Western societies over the past 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, and you know, it really is. It's one of those things where, you know, it's been interesting to watch these waves, right? Because of course it was mainstream in the earliest days of America, given our history of slavery, and then it became taboo, you know, post civil rights era, and then, like we said earlier, here comes a guy to give license to the hate, and also there's the GOP specifically, who has been doing this for decades and kind of riling up the anger, and right wing media, as we've seen, has kind of stewed this for quite some time, and then it kind of bubbled up, and then now here we are with the result of that. And you know, it's interesting because you discussing the counter narratives, and I know you touched on it broadly, but I really think the community engagement aspect is important because while of course it's pretty much primarily about white supremacy, that's where we see driving the radical right at the moment. You even see it dripping fully in the mainstream with people like Tucker Carlson out here just touting the great replacement theory, that, you know, immigrants, brown people are coming to take your jobs and political power. And I think that's of course what it ends up being. But like you said, sometimes there are, you know, it's a lot of the times, as we've, probably a conversation for a different whole. You can have a whole episode on just, you know, incels, right? But like I think a lot of the time misogyny comes into play, and then there's, you know, these men need community, and then they find an online community, and especially during COVID, there's been this need for people to speak to, and online specifically, there's these communities that promise, that give them camaraderie, that tell, you know, that's where it kind of leads people in first. And one of our writers at Rantt, you know, Luke Huizinga, he essentially went into these right-wing groups and went into Telegram, and, you know, saw a lot of what's going on there. And you're right, it's really, they're sharing memes. They think that they're creating a kind of group approach here. And I know it's the reason why it's so interesting to talk to you, especially being based in the UK, is that there's a UK Prevent program, and there's all these other programs that have been implemented, of course, in the wake originally of Islamic extremism. And you've obviously, part of your research is focused on anti-Islam extremism within specifically the radical right. But I wonder what your thoughts are on, because obviously there's civil liberties at play here, but when it comes to community engagement and using some of the tactics that were used against you know, Islamic extremism, which did work, what are your thoughts on how like the community engagement aspect of this could work, from whether it's a NGO aspect, whether it's media aspect, because, you know, we're not an NGO, but we definitely try to push, you know, content around this. But what do you think would be a reasonable approach for a community focused way to kind of bring these people out of their extremism, or even prevent it in the first place?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the $1 million question at the moment, Ahmed, in terms of policy circles or discussions that I've been in. Because in terms of defining community, when we're looking at the radical right, because of that issue of how radical right ideology is now kind of, my colleague Matthew talks about in terms of abutting kind of the mainstream, and this kind of conversation filters through to the online space when we're thinking about how social media companies try to label different bits of content, because obviously you have, I mean, stepping to the kind of what we were talking about earlier in terms of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, there's ones which talk about kind of this invisible hand, or some sort of cabal of people who are rigging the system, but we all know that it kind of starts there, and then it goes, then people, it's a very small step to then label kind of a scapegoat around that. I mean, in terms of kind of community engagement, I think something that came out of when I was doing my PhD work, looking at local manifestations of the far right in the UK at least, is trying to kind of disrupt permissive environments where some of this prejudice is kind of left unchallenged, or to fester, because people, well, one of the things about doing this counter narratives research is that often people are looking for an answer or a reason to their problems or perceived grievances, and it's just like the factual element of some of these kind of narratives, they might be kind of present there. I mean, there might be kind of dissatisfaction maybe around kind of the socioeconomic situation of a certain certain group of people, but it's kind of what you where you go from there in terms of then labeling what the problem is, and so it's around trying to kind of challenge that, and come have conversations with people that might be quite difficult, especially if you've got polarization happening between different communities, based either on kind of religious or kind of racial lines. But there's quite an established area of research about intergroup contact, which leads us to suggest that at least when people get in a room, they might disagree with each other, but if they're allowed to have dialogue in a fairly structured way, then that can lead as kind of a ground for kind of puncturing these kind of I guess offline echo chambers, and kind of it complicates things, because if you're sitting in your own sort of permissive environment or bubble, then you can kind of chew and get angry about these things. But when you're faced with people of this community that you're labeling as being the source of your problems, it's a lot more nuanced and difficult when you're faced with another human being who has the same doubts or kind of problems that are in common. So I think that kind of humanitarian emphasis when it comes to community engagement is something that's quite important, as well as trying to start some of those difficult conversations, which might be quite raw and might annoy people to start with, but at least that gives the grounds for some kind of relationship going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and when it comes to that aspect, I know one thing that has been a discussion point and a research point with you all at CARR is to get former extremists to kind of come in and be able to disrupt some of this. Because I think when it comes down to it, I know we talk about counter narratives and we talk about the need to implement these programs, but a lot of the times the government can't necessarily be the face of that, given the distrust, the broader distrust within these groups towards the government in the first place. So I know NGOs and other aspects, but it really comes down to people within that community, either people who are radicalized or people who are coming out of it. So how has that recruitment process happened? How have you seen it, practically implemented? And of course, we're going to talk in a second about, your broader recommendations for, let's say, the Biden administration and NGOs in the US. But when it comes to do you see that being one of the most effective ways, using former extremists to disrupt these communities and kind of wake people up out of their extremist stupor?
Yeah, I think having sort of everyday individuals involved, either former extremists, but also people who've been like victims of a particular extremist group. I mean, there's all sorts of ethical and duty of care kind of implications around this, which we won't get into because we just don't have the time. But I think certainly the powerful kind of personal testimony, we did a year-long series about far-right de-radicalization as a webinar series at CARR, and those will be made available on Hidaya's website. It was part of this broader counter narratives project. But what was really powerful about the testimonies of some of the former far extremists that we talked to, who exited quite a while ago, is kind of how kind of particular instances towards the end of their engagement with fairly violent far-right organizations kind of led them out. So usually it was kind of the result of maybe kind of burnout, simply because being in these fairly kind of violent movements is just emotionally kind of stressful. But the main one was kind of, I mean, remember in one instance, it was the case of like an ultimatum from someone's wife saying, I can't tolerate this anymore. You have to either choose your family or you choose the movement. And that was kind of a key wake-up call. Another instance was simply because the level of misogyny within these movements, just also some of the double standards of some of the leaders, in terms of what they were doing within the movement. So a lot of people exit mainly because they just become so disillusioned. It's usually just trying to find that bridge and to kind of reach out. It's interesting, a lot of kind of counter narrative work which is done at this kind of more harder end of people who are very committed tends to be to send out messages online if you're searching for maybe like neo-Nazi material on Google, is to kind of hit people with kind of more like psychosocial messages. So saying like, are you feeling lonely? Are you feeling disillusioned? You can talk to someone about this. Because a lot of kind of what is a barrier to people exiting is just trying to imagine a different life outside of these movements. They've become so involved in this fairly closed, I wouldn't say cultish, but fairly closed kind of social environments that that they find it difficult to exit. And there's NGOs like Exit UK in the UK, and also Life After Hate in North America do some really good work in terms of helping people out. And I mean, in terms of entry, a lot of people get kind of some kind of it's not usually to do with some kind of something that happens in their life. It's usually kind of more voluntaristic than that. But then, slowly people find it harder to exit because of how involved they become. So there's a lot of very kind of, it's a long-term process. To try and get people out of these movements.
Yeah, because I mean, it's really, like you said, it can be various factors, whether it's family pulling you out, ultimatum, or burnout. And we're seeing a lot of that, I think, in the QAnon movement, because you can only be wrong so many times. You know, they predicted Trump was going to somehow be inaugurated. Some were saying Trump and Biden switched bodies somehow. That one didn't last too long. I think they moved on from that quickly. But like, apparently Biden's an actor and on set. And then eventually people were starting to realize, hey, maybe this is a little crazy. So I think we're seeing a lot of the burnout in QAnon. But when it comes to the other groups, I think also when it comes to, like when we talked about earlier, social media has really kind of stunted some of the recruitment and the coordination that they can do. as we saw, like the most recent, they did an attempted rally a few weeks, I think last week or a couple weeks ago, and it just fell flat. It was like
Mm.
supposed to be a global, or a nationwide protest here, and it didn't really work because I think it's proven deplatforming, and that's the subject of our next uh, interview. But deplatforming works, and I think when it comes to these groups specifically and the community engagement and using former extremists, now I think is a good time to talk about, what practical things can be done by the Biden administration and, NGOs in the US, maybe in partnership with them. Because I know it's hard. We still haven't declared officially any of these groups domestic terrorist groups because this is different. Although there are practical things that can be done that was used against ISIS on some of these groups, there's a limit given the First Amendment and given the protections, civil liberty protections we have here in the U.S. So you can't necessarily do what you did to ISIS to these people, and also there's a potential for these practices being weaponized against actual good faith people and protesters, like those protesting racial justice, if a future administration were to get a hold of those tools. So there's so many factors in trying to figure out exactly how this could be done. But what recommendations would you give to the Biden administration on what steps they could take? Because I know this is a priority for them. What steps do you think they could take to address this problem?
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Armin. I think it's a really good question, and that intro to that in terms of learning lessons from the post 9/11 kind of impulse, almost to put together a scaffold of securitized approaches towards the extremism which was pressing at that time is kind of a pertinent lesson I think that we can learn. I think taking not too much time, but having that time to make sure that people aren't responding emotionally to this issue, I think is quite sound, and to learn those lessons in terms of civil liberties and also stigmatizing certain sections of domestic populations is going to be really kind of tantamount to how effective the response is kind of going forward. I think in terms of I mean, rhetorically, it's been interesting to see how the Department for Homeland Security and the Biden administration have been kind of reacting and kind of rhetorically talking about things. I mean, I know there's in certain sections of the policy community an appetite for something like a January the 6th commission in order to try and kind of draw out the lessons that need to be learnt. I think in terms of the prescription piece, I think that's a really interesting kind of debate that's happening at the moment. I mean, in the UK, we've in the past week we've had atomorphin division being prescribed, and a lot of people are saying, "Oh, Britain is kind of at the forefront of dealing with this." I think, I don't know, I'm becoming more as I go on more skeptical of the power of prescription, simply because a lot of these groups they get prescribed under one name, and then individuals from that group just form another organization, which might be slightly smaller because less committed people are scared to be a part of and then to actually bear the brunt of prescription powers, which at the kind of the very light ends, just being a member in the UK can lead to criminal prosecution and time in prison. So I don't know whether kind of prescription is necessarily the way forward or the answer.
And prescription, you mean, is in like
Ban-
essentially, banning and designating these groups as extremist groups, right? And then if someone's a member, then essentially, and of course, like you said, it probably wouldn't work here, right? Because that tramples on a lot of different rights here.
Yeah, and I think it's, I mean, I don't get me wrong. I think that it should be in the toolkit, but I think there's other kind of more criminal aspects that people can look at. Certainly, there's probably other criminal charges in relation to kind of the use of weaponry or forms of violence that these groups perpetrate that can be used within the arsenal of responses. I guess the kind of the softer end of things. I think one of the kind of key responses that now people can perhaps breathe a bit more after the turbulent years of the Trump administration is to kind of further embed some work at a more grassroots level around kind of critical digital literacy, and kind of I think that's one of the things we try to attempt as at the centre is to kind of make people aware of some of the dangers of some of the narratives that these groups kind of perpetuate, but it's also around simply just like checking the sources of the information that people now kind of predominantly get from social media outfits, and just being aware of critically engaging and being aware of perhaps what agenda an organization might be kind of pushing, because as you said, in terms of the pandemic, especially when it comes to young people, young people in particular have in the UK at least been quite kind of disproportionately represented when we're looking at referrals to on the far right when it comes to the Preventing Violent Extremism program that the government have here. So, and perhaps not, I think everyone can learn about critical digital literacy, but I think especially when it comes to younger people, that's something that could be better implemented, and perhaps the administration would want to take that up. I know that again, the Peril Lab at the American University are doing a lot of work around this as well.
Sure.
So yeah, and I think also it's coming from a European context, this kind of the labeling of far extremism as domestic extremism is something that I find slightly kind of problematic. Also coming from an academic point of view, it's good to be able to kind of define fairly closely what you're looking at. And I know that there's been a lot of anxieties around other forms of domestic extremism. So perhaps having a more general umbrella is probably the best way to go. But I think kind of defining what we mean by the far right at an official level, and having kind of a domestic terrorism kind of statute would be something to kind of put efforts that I'm sure that will be forthcoming on a more sustainable kind of basis.
And I want to touch on a few points that you grouped in there. But first, I want to touch on the domestic terrorism aspect, because I think there's a lot of questions around exactly how to approach that. Because I know earlier you mentioned prescription, and essentially what we're kind of seeing now is that the law enforcement is subtly treating these groups like domestic terrorist organizations without, or at least like organized crime at the minimum, because there's reports that they're considering RICO charges against some of the insurrectionists who, Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. That's not confirmed, but it was Reuters who reported it. But one thing that is confirmed, and what we have seen, is conspiracy charges being leveled against Proud Boys, and that's interesting right there, because that means you're working a part of a larger group. They're treating them like organized crime now, and I know that's not at the level of domestic terrorism statute, but that seems to be a step forward in that aspect. Do you agree that that's kind of, I mean, I not necessarily that the domestic terrorism statutes, there's a lot of discussion going on about that, but do you think the conspiracy charges were indicative of a positive step towards addressing these as a bigger movement?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's kind of again one of the kind of items that we can think of it within the toolkit of how we kind of approach these movements. I mean, certainly it kind of, I think also been talking about whether kind of sedition charges should also be levied against some people within these kind of groups and movements. But I think in terms of kind of thinking about this issue in terms of domestic and foreign, I think the actual kind of the trajectory of far-right movements is going in a more transnational direction. So having this separation is not necessarily kind of just stepping back from looking at that specific instance of conspiracy. It might not be the most helpful thing to have in the toolkit of how policymakers kind of address this issue, because a lot of these groups, including the Proud Boys, have international chapters in places like Australia. I've obviously had some in Canada and other locations internationally. So that muddies the water slightly.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because I haven't seen that talked about in that way, that we keep referring to this as domestic extremism, domestic terrorism, but in reality, and we've actually published an article from CARR that, the radical right's, becoming an international conglomerate, right? It's an enterprise, it's a collaborative movement internationally. So it's not necessarily domestic terrorism exclusively. This is or extremism. This is an international, right wing. They claim it's populist, but it's fake populism under the guise of populism. But of course, it's white supremacy, extremism, anti-government movements, or actually fascist movements. They claim to be. It's weird. It's like you claim to be anti-government while proposing authoritarian takeovers. I don't really know. You're anti-democratic government. You're anti-liberal, Western liberal world order. But there's so many interesting factors on this. We can go on about this for forever. But I do want to talk about, kind of close out talking about just broader, the point you touched on a little bit ago, the digital literacy aspect of this. And I just wanted, I think that's what the fact that people need people need a place, and people need a set of publications and a source of information in which they can go to see these ideologies and extremist views laid bare, in which they can digest it in a meaningful way. Because that's one of the problems in coverage. Why I respect CARR and appreciate being your partners, because the way that your scholars, they are researchers writing this. Whereas I see, and I keep going back to that 60 Minutes Oath Keepers interview, because it really, really bugged me. Because that's not how you cover extremism. You don't give people a platform to spew ridiculousness and then question, and act. No, you don't just interview extremists and let them perpetuate their views. That's how we got Donald Trump. And now Marjorie Taylor Greene. What you do is you discuss what it is, you dissect it, and that's why these articles are effective, and this CARR, your organization, what you do is so effective, because you can tell researchers were not behind those working on those interviews or working on some of these pieces. And I think there's a broader obviously our education system needs to be reformed, but in your view, what do you think do you think I know we've talked about NGOs, and I know we've talked about the government, but do you think there's a bigger role media can play and should play in addressing extremism? And do you think that there needs to be a change in the coverage?
Yeah, I think that's again a really good issue to kind of point out, because as a kind of researcher and observer of how activists within the far right, especially ones that are very good at appearing on the media, have been interviewed. It's quite sometimes I don't think that, this doesn't apply to to every kind of outlet, but some journalists are given the brief to do cover a particular story, and they might just like be like completely overwhelmed by how good a particular extremist actor might be in terms of their brief. So like, I think what sometimes naively we forget is that these individuals are completely immersed in terms of rehearsing arguments and narratives around, let's say, the issue of immigration, for example. They're kind of completely I don't know how to describe, but completely embedded in this conspiratorial kind of worldview, and they kind of live it, as it were, which makes it really hard if you're then having to perhaps respond and counter them if they've got all these very rehearsed kind of lines to it. So I think in terms of kind of the media, it's kind of being kind of aware that you'll get these fairly kind of inflammatory and rehearsed responses, and trying to think about before going into that interview how you would kind of try and get around those, and just kind of try and stop them from being able to perhaps kind of take a lead, and kind of trying to offset that, but
fact check it and
yeah,
poke holes in the ideology, because one of the better ways to, I think, it's good, you can do these interviews, but it's better to interview former extremists, in my opinion. Those are super productive. Those are great for society. But if you're just going to interview the Proud Boy leader or some random oath keeper that's giving you their monologue on how great their organization is, don't run that. All right, I don't care how much ratings it gives you. You're boosting their recruitment. They're banned from social media for a reason. Don't give them a platform to spew and normalize what they do. So, but again, that's why we do these series. That's why we're doing this partnership. That's why we do the work we do, and that's why now Rantt, as you know, I was doing a bunch of Trump, documenting his presidency and doing all that, but now Rantt is kind of leaning fully in just this extremism, disinformation space on the content end, and because it's the root of the problem, aside from obviously America's history, which is the root, and the education system not teaching media literacy. But that's what we're here for. So, we could go on for a long time, but I think we can go ahead and stop here. I really appreciate you coming on for the interview. We're gonna have you again on we're gonna do a panel in the end of May or early June, I believe, with all the people who we interview here in this I think 6-part series of interviews. So thank you for being the first one, man. It was great to see you again after I haven't seen you in so long.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks, Ahmed. There's some really good kind of issues, which hopefully we'll be able to explore in more detail in the future interviews and the roundtable at the end. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks, Ahmed.